beg you, show us mercy.
They chained her to the frost-covered courtyard, laughing as the Omega wept into the snow. They thought she was broken. They thought she was nothing but a bargaining chip. But as the blood moon crested, the iron chains melted like wax. They hadn't broken a weak girl, they had uncaged a god. The northern territories of the lycanthrope kingdom were a brutal, unforgiving place, where the strength of your wolf dictated the value of your life. Nestled deep within the frosted peaks of the Whispering Mountains lay the Silverpine Pack, governed by the ancient and supposedly noble House Sinclair. To the outside world, the Sinclairs were the epitome of lupine aristocracy. They were wealthy, they were ruthless, and their alphas were feared across the continent. But behind the towering iron gates and the opulent tapestry-draped halls of their ancestral keep lay a dark, shameful secret. Her name was Isolde. Born the second daughter to Lord Alistair Sinclair, the reigning alpha of Silverpine, Isolde was a stain on a perfect lineage. In a society that worshipped power, Isolde had presented as an Omega on her 18th birthday. But she wasn't just an Omega, she was practically scentless, incredibly small, and her inner wolf had never once surfaced. For 3 agonizing years, she had been trapped in her human skin, unable to shift, unable to hear the comforting voice of her inner beast. She was a defect, a runt. "Wipe the blood off the marble, Isolde, before the guests arrive," sneered Rosalie, Isolde's older half-sister. Rosalie was a striking, statuesque female who had recently presented as a dominant beta. She wore a gown of crushed crimson velvet that cost more than the entire village below the keep earned in a year. Isolde knelt on the freezing stone floor, her hands raw and blistered, scrubbing at the remnants of a fresh kill the Alpha's hunting party had dragged through the foyer. She wore nothing but coarse, scratchy burlap, the standard uniform for the lowest Omegas of the pack. "Yes, Rosalie," Isolde murmured, keeping her eyes fixed on the soapy water. Eye contact with a higher-ranking wolf was an offense punishable by the lash. "That's Lady Rosalie to you, you disgusting little mute," Rosalie hissed, stepping forward and intentionally driving the heel of her riding boot into Isolde's fragile hand. A sharp gasp escaped Isolde's lips, but she swallowed her scream. If she cried out, it would only bring the guards, and the guards enjoyed making an example of the Alpha's disgraced daughter. "Leave her be, Rosalie. She's already pathetic enough. You don't need to break her fingers before the auction." The booming, arrogant voice belonged to Kaelin Blackwood, the heir to the neighboring Ironclaw pack, and Rosalie's newly minted mate. Kaelin was a mountain of muscle and cruelty, his eyes a cold, calculating slate gray. "The auction?" Isolde's voice trembled, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up, forgetting the rules of submission in her sudden terror. Kaelin laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Oh, didn't your dear father tell you? Tomorrow is the winter solstice ball. The entire court of the Northern Territories will be here. Lord Alistair has finally tired of paying for your meager rations. You're being sold to Lord Fenwick of the Boglands. He needs a new scullery maid, and perhaps a warming pan for his bed." The Boglands, Lord Fenwick. The name struck a chord of primal terror deep within Isolde's chest. Fenwick was a disgraced, scarred beta, known for torturing his servants. Omegas sent to his swamp-infested lands rarely survived the winter. "My father wouldn't," Isolde whispered, tears finally pooling in her large, striking hazel eyes. "I am a Sinclair." "You are nothing!" Rosalie snapped, backhanding Isolde across the face. The force of the blow sent Isolde sprawling across the wet marble, her cheek striking the cold stone. "You are a genetic dead end. You have no wolf, no scent, no power. Tomorrow night, you will wear the iron collar of a slave, and you will leave this keep forever. Now, finish cleaning, or I will have you locked in the ice house for the night." As Rosalie and Kaelin walked away, their cruel laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings, Isolde slowly pushed herself up. Her cheek throbbed, blooming with dark bruises. She stared at her reflection in the dirty scrub water. She was pale, her cheekbones sharp from malnutrition, her raven hair a tangled mess. But as she stared, something strange happened. For a fraction of a second, the reflection, staring back at her, didn't have hazel eyes. They were gold, a burning, luminescent, molten gold. Isolde blinked, rubbing her eyes, and the illusion vanished. It was just a trick of the light, she told herself, just the exhaustion playing games with her mind. She finished her cruel task, her heart heavy with the weight of her impending doom. She had 24 hours until the solstice ball, 24 hours until her life was officially handed over to a monster. That night, lying on her thin pallet of straw in the drafty servants' quarters, Isolde wept. She prayed to the moon goddess, begging for an escape, begging for her dormant wolf to wake up and save her. But the only answer was the howling of the winter wind outside her barred window. Little did Isolde know, her prayers had not gone unheard. Deep within the recesses of her soul, an ancient dormant power was listening, and it was furious. The night of the winter solstice ball arrived with a bitter, biting blizzard that seemed to reflect the coldness of the Silverpine Pack. The great hall was transformed into a breathtaking spectacle of wealth and excess. Thousands of enchanted floating candles bathed the room in a warm, ethereal glow. Banners of silver and emerald green, the colors of House Sinclair, hung from the rafters. The air was thick with the overpowering scents of roasted venison, spiced wine, and the clashing pheromones of hundreds of alphas and betas vying for dominance. In the shadows of the grand staircase, hidden from the immediate view of the glittering court, Isolde stood trembling. They had not even given her the dignity of a proper dress. Instead, the head housekeeper had forced her into a threadbare, moth-eaten gown of faded gray, stripping away whatever pride she had left. Around her delicate neck rested a heavy, cold band of rough iron, a slave collar, waiting to be latched. "Stand straight, you wretched thing," hissed Gideon, the pack's lead enforcer, gripping her arm tightly enough to leave bruises. "The High King's emissary is present tonight. If you embarrass your father, I will personally throw you to the hounds." Isolde peered through the balustrades. Sitting at the head table was her father, Lord Alistair Sinclair. He was a terrifyingly handsome man in his late 50s, his silver hair swept back, his posture rigid with authority. But his eyes were empty of any paternal warmth. Beside him sat Lord Cedric Hastings, an emissary from the royal Lycan court in the capital. Cedric was an observer, a man of quiet power who watched the room with a calculating gaze. And then there was Lord Fenwick. He sat a few seats down, stuffing his face with greasy meat, wine spilling down his unkempt beard. He was a massive, bloated man, a jagged scar running down the left side of his face, pulling his eye into a permanent, gruesome wink. When he smiled, his teeth were stained black. He was looking directly at the staircase, his eyes locked on the shadows where Isolde was hidden, a predatory hunger radiating from him. Isolde's breath hitched in her throat. A strange, suffocating heat began to build in her chest. It was a sensation she had never felt before, like a burning ember had been swallowed whole and was now resting at the base of her ribs. The music suddenly stopped. The Grand Herald struck his staff against the floor 3 times. "My lords and ladies," the herald announced, his voice magically amplified to reach every corner of the vast hall. "Lord Alistair Sinclair of the Silverpine Pack requests your attention." Alistair stood, raising a goblet of wine. The room fell into absolute, terrified silence. "Welcome, friends, allies, and honored guests," Alistair began, his deep, commanding alpha voice washing over the crowd. "Tonight, we celebrate the solstice, the turning of the season, but we also celebrate the strengthening of alliances. Tonight I cleanse my house of its final weakness." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Bring her out," Alistair commanded, not even bothering to look toward the stairs. Gideon shoved Isolde forward. She stumbled out of the shadows and onto the grand landing, fully exposed to the scrutinizing eyes of over 500 elite werewolves. The silence in the room morphed into a collective gasp, followed by cruel, bubbling laughter. "Look at her," someone whispered loudly. "Scentless trash," another scoffed. "I wouldn't let my weakest pup play with that." Isolde stood frozen, the heat in her chest growing hotter, spreading down her arms and legs like liquid fire. She forced herself to look at her father. She silently pleaded with him. "Please, I am your daughter. Do not do this." Alistair's face was made of stone. "For 3 years, this creature has consumed our resources while offering nothing in return to the pack. She is wolfless, an abomination of our bloodline. Therefore, I formally strip Isolde of the Sinclair name. I banish her from the Silverpine Pack, and I bestow her, as property, to Lord Fenwick of the Boglands, in exchange for trading rights through the eastern swamps." The court erupted into polite applause. It was a business transaction, nothing more. Lord Fenwick stood up, wiping his greasy mouth with the back of his hand. He lumbered toward the center of the dance floor, gazing up at Isolde on the landing. "Come down here, little bird," Fenwick slurred, chuckling. "Let your new master get a good look at what he bought. I hope you scream louder than the last one." Rosalie, standing near the bottom of the stairs with Kaelin, sneered. "Go on, slave. Your master is waiting." Isolde couldn't move. The fire inside her was no longer just heat, it was pain. Blinding, agonizing pain. Her bones felt like they were vibrating. A strange, low frequency began to hum in her ears, drowning out the mocking laughter of the court. I said, "Come down here," Fenwick barked, his patience wearing thin. He unleashed a fraction of his beta aura, intending to force the weak Omega to her knees. The oppressive weight of his aura slammed into Isolde. Normally, an Omega would instantly collapse under such pressure, exposing their neck in total submission. But Isolde didn't fall. Instead, a sudden, violent spasm racked her body. She let out a choked gasp, dropping to her hands and knees on the landing. "Pathetic," Alistair muttered from the high table, shaking his head in disgust. "Gideon, drag her down to him." Gideon reached down, grabbing Isolde by her matted hair to hoist her up. But the moment his hand touched her, a shockwave of raw, unadulterated energy exploded from Isolde's body. It was a concussive blast of pure kinetic force that sent Gideon, a 200-pound battle-hardened enforcer, flying backward. He crashed through the heavy oak balustrade, plummeting 20 feet to the marble floor below with a sickening crunch. The laughter in the great hall died instantly. The music of the string quartet screeched to a halt. 500 pairs of eyes stared in absolute shock at the small, frail girl shivering on the landing. Isolde was gasping for air, her fingernails digging deep into the polished wood of the floor. The burning in her chest had reached a crescendo. It wasn't a fire anymore. It was a heartbeat. Thump. Thump. It was so loud that the vibrations could be felt in the floorboards. "What is the meaning of this?" Alistair roared, his alpha aura flaring in anger. "Guards! Subdue her!" 4 armed Lycan guards rushed the stairs, drawing silver-tipped batons. Isolde looked up, and as she did, the entire court collectively stopped breathing. Her hazel eyes were gone. In their place were 2 swirling orbs of radiant, glowing gold. The air pressure in the room suddenly shifted, popping the ears of everyone present. The overpowering scent of roasted meats and expensive perfumes was instantly obliterated, replaced by the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of frankincense, ozone, and crushed pine needles. It was the scent of a primal, ancient dominance. "Father," Isolde whispered, but it wasn't her voice. It was a voice layered with 1,000 echoes, vibrating with a guttural, terrifying power. "You shouldn't have sold me." The transformation did not happen like a normal werewolf's shift. A standard shift was a fluid, muscular realignment, a shedding of skin to reveal the beast beneath in a matter of seconds. Isolde's shift was an apocalyptic event. A blinding pillar of golden light erupted from her spine, illuminating the grand hall with the brilliance of a midday sun. The 4 guards rushing up the stairs cried out in agony, dropping their weapons as the sheer heat and pressure of her aura hit them like a physical wall. They fell to their knees, clutching their throats, unable to breathe. The sound of snapping bones echoed like cannon fire. Isolde threw her head back, unleashing a scream that morphed midway into a roar so deafening. The enchanted floating candles above shattered into a shower of harmless sparks. The massive stained glass windows depicting the history of House Sinclair spiderwebbed before blowing outward into the blizzard. "Alpha, what is that?" Rosalie shrieked, cowering behind Kalen, as the very foundation of the keep began to shake. Kalen didn't answer. His arrogant, slate-gray eyes were wide with a primal, instinctual terror he had never known. Every fiber of his Lycan DNA was screaming at him to run, to hide, to submit. On the landing, the golden light began to solidify, taking the shape of a massive beast. When the light finally fractured and dissipated, the frail, battered Omega was gone. In her place stood a creature out of legend. She was colossal. Easily standing 7 feet at the shoulder, she was nearly twice the size of a standard alpha wolf. Her fur was not the common grays, browns, or blacks of the northern packs. It was pure, shimmering gold, catching the ambient light and reflecting it like spun silk. Her muscles rippled with suppressed, cataclysmic power beneath her coat. But it was her eyes that paralyzed the room, 2 twin suns burning with ancient, unspeakable fury. A golden wolf, a myth, a bedtime story told to pups about the original progenitors of the Lycan race, the first wolves blessed by the moon goddess herself, said to hold power over all other bloodlines. They had been extinct for over 2 millennia. Until now. The golden wolf padded forward, her massive paws making no sound on the splintered wood. She looked down at the sea of terrified faces. Lord Fenwick, the man who had intended to make her a slave, took a stumbling step backward. His face was devoid of color. He opened his mouth, perhaps to command her, perhaps to scream, but the golden wolf merely locked eyes with him. She didn't growl, she didn't bark, she simply allowed the full, unbridled weight of her aura to drop onto the room. It was like a mountain collapsing on them. Instantly, the betas and omegas in the room collapsed, their bodies slamming into the marble floor in forced, absolute submission. They whined, covering their heads, unable to even twitch under the oppressive weight of her dominance. The alphas fought it. Kalen gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing red as he tried to maintain his footing. But the golden wolf turned her massive head toward him, her lips pulling back to reveal fangs the size of daggers. The aura intensified, targeting him specifically. Kalen's knees buckled. A pathetic whimper escaped the fearsome air of the Ironclaw pack as he crashed to the floor, exposing his neck to the beast on the stairs. Lord Alistair Sinclair, however, refused to break. He was the supreme alpha of the region. He gripped the edge of the high table, his knuckles white, his own aura flaring violently as he tried to combat his daughter's power. "You are an abomination," Alistair roared, his voice shaking. "I am your alpha. I am your father. Submit." The golden wolf slowly descended the grand staircase. Each step she took seemed to fracture the marble beneath her. She moved with a terrifying, lethal grace, parting the sea of bowing, whimpering werewolves as she made her way toward the high table. She stopped mere inches from Alistair. The heat radiating off her immense body caused the wine in the goblets to boil. Alistair looked up into the molten gold eyes of the beast he had starved, beaten, and sold. The arrogant superiority in his eyes finally cracked, replaced by the horrifying realization of what he had done. He hadn't harbored a runt, he had harbored a queen. The golden wolf leaned in, her snout inches from his face. She opened her jaws, and though she was in wolf form, a voice telepathic, booming, and wrathful echoed directly into the minds of every single conscious werewolf in the hall. "You are no alpha of mine," the voice rumbled in their heads, a sound that brought tears of terror to their eyes. "And this court will bleed for its sins." The silence that followed Isolda's telepathic promise was more terrifying than the roar that had preceded it. In the shattered remains of the Silverpine Keep, amidst the debris of splintered oak and shattered enchanted glass, the golden wolf stood as a god among mortals. The oppressive weight of her aura had driven the entire northern court to their knees. Powerful pack leaders, wealthy barons, and seasoned warriors were reduced to weeping, trembling masses pressed against the cold marble. Lord Alistair Sinclair's face was completely drained of color. The man who had ruled the northern territories with an iron fist, who had sneered at weakness and worshipped brutality, was now violently shaking. His own alpha aura had been entirely extinguished, smothered out of existence by the sheer magnitude of his daughter's power. He fell to his knees, not out of choice, but because his legs could no longer support the weight of his own sudden, profound irrelevance. To the side of the grand staircase, Lord Fenwick of the Boglands was hyperventilating. The grotesque, scarred beta realized with sickening clarity that the scullery maid he had just purchased was a mythological apex predator. Panic, primal and blinding, seized his mind. Thinking only of survival, Fenwick slowly began to drag his bloated body backward, inching toward the heavy oak doors leading out into the blizzard. The golden wolf didn't even turn her head. She simply shifted her gaze. Her molten gold eyes locked onto Fenwick. A low, vibrating growl started deep within her massive chest, rattling the remaining silverware on the high table. In a blur of motion too fast for the lichen eye to track, she crossed the great hall. The wind from her movement extinguished the few remaining torches. Before Fenwick could even scream, a massive, heavy golden paw slammed down onto the center of his back, pinning him to the floor. The sound of his ribs cracking echoed sharply in the quiet hall. Fenwick wailed in agony, his face pressed flat against the stone, a puddle of warm urine spreading out from beneath him, soaking into his expensive velvet trousers. "You thought to place an iron collar upon my neck." Isolde's telepathic voice slithered into Fenwick's mind, laced with an ancient, venomous wrath. "Perhaps I should see how an iron collar fits yours." "Please," Fenwick sobbed, spitting blood onto the marble. "Mercy! I didn't know. Lord Alistair tricked me. I am but a humble lord of the bogs." "You are a monster who feasts on the broken," the voice replied, the golden glow of her eyes intensifying, and tonight, the broken bite back. She raised her other paw, the wicked, silver-sheened claws extending, preparing to deliver a lethal, decapitating strike. "I believe the bog lord has soiled himself enough for one evening, my queen. The voice cut through the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. It was calm, cultured, and devoid of the mind-numbing terror that paralyzed everyone else. The golden wolf snapped her massive jaws shut, turning her head toward the high table. Standing there, entirely unaffected by the crushing, divine gravity of the golden aura, was Lord Cedric Hastings. The quiet, observant emissary from the royal court brushed a piece of shattered glass off the sleeve of his immaculate, charcoal-gray tailored suit. He was a tall man, with sharp, aristocratic features, piercing cobalt blue eyes, and dark hair, lightly dusted with silver, at the temples. A collective gasp swept through the conscious members of the court. How was the emissary standing? Even Alistair Sinclair was on his knees. Cedric stepped out from behind the high table and began to walk calmly down the steps toward the golden wolf. As he moved, the air around him began to shimmer. The polite, muted scent of a typical courtier vanished, replaced by an intoxicating, overwhelming fragrance of petrichor, dark amber, and ozone, the scent of a storm about to break over the ocean. He wasn't fighting Isolda's aura. He was seamlessly parting it, matching its ancient frequency with his own. "Who? What are you?" Kalen whispered from his pathetic position on the floor, his slate-gray eyes wide with disbelief. Cedric didn't look at Kalen. He kept his eyes locked on the golden wolf. As he reached the center of the floor, Cedric reached up and unclasped the heavy silver brooch at his collar. The magical glamour that had veiled his true identity dissolved into a mist of black ash. He grew taller, his shoulders broadening into an imposing, muscular silhouette. His cobalt eyes darkened into a terrifying, swirling midnight blue, rimmed with a glowing, luminescent silver. The heavy, suffocating pressure of a true royal alpha washed over the room, mingling with the golden wolf's divine heat. "Allow me to formally introduce myself, though under much different circumstances than I had originally planned," he said, his voice now carrying a deep, resonant timbre that commanded absolute, cellular obedience. "I am Cedric Sterling, Crown Prince of the Royal Lycanthrope Kingdom and the High King's sole heir." Alistair let out a choked sob of horror. The emissary he had treated with polite indifference was the future king himself, traveling in disguise to inspect the Northern Territories. Cedric stopped 10 feet away from the golden wolf. He did not bare his neck, but he did something far more shocking. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head in a gesture of profound, unparalleled respect. For 2,000 years, our historians believe the golden bloodline had been bred out of existence, Cedric spoke, his eyes filled with awe as he looked up at the towering beast. "A genetic impossibility, yet here you stand, the true sovereign of our kind." Hiding in plain sight, enduring the cruelty of lesser men, Isolde huffed, a plume of hot steam rising from her nostrils. She was wary, her muscles coiled tight. The betrayal of her family had left deep, bleeding scars on her soul, and she trusted no one, not even a handsome crown prince. But as she looked into Cedric's midnight blue eyes, the ancient wolf inside her did not sense a threat. It sensed an equal. It sensed a tether. The burning in her chest shifted from a fire of rage to a strange magnetic pull. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught the corner of Isolda's eye. Gideon, the lead enforcer who had been thrown from the balcony earlier, had miraculously dragged his broken body across the floor. Delirious with pain and blinded by the ingrained loyalty to his alpha, he had pulled a silver-forged hunting dagger from his boot. With a screaming, desperate war cry, Gideon lunged upward from the shadows, aiming the deadly silver blade directly at the golden wolf's exposed underbelly. Isolde was too massive to dodge the close-range attack in time, but she didn't need to. Before Gideon could even complete his swing, Cedric moved. It was a terrifying display of royal speed. He intercepted Gideon's attack mid-air, wrapping his large, gloved hand entirely over the silver blade. The metal hissed and burned against his flesh, but Cedric's expression didn't even twitch. With a brutal, effortless twist of his wrist, Cedric snapped the silver blade in half, and in the same fluid motion, drove his knee squarely into Gideon's chest. The sickening crunch of a collapsing ribcage echoed through the hall, and the enforcer fell backward unconscious before he hit the ground. Cedric stood, shaking the drops of his own silver-burned blood from his hand. He looked back at Isolde, his jaw tight. "No one," Cedric rumbled, his royal aura flaring with protective fury, "will ever lay a hand on you again. I swear it upon my life, my crown, and my wolf." The words hung in the air, heavy with a vow that transcended court politics. It was an oath of the soul. Isolde's golden eyes softened. The devastating heat radiating from her body began to cool. She took a step back, closed her eyes, and let out a long, shuddering breath. The blinding, brilliant pillar of golden light erupted once more, enveloping her massive form. When the light faded, the monstrous beast was gone. Isolde stood, in her human form, shivering, on the cold marble. But she was no longer the frail, defeated Omega wrapped in burlap and moth-eaten gray fabric. The transformation had healed her malnourished body. Her raven hair tumbled in thick, luxurious waves down her back. Her skin glowed with vitality, and though she was completely bare, she radiated a quiet, untouchable majesty. Cedric did not hesitate. He immediately stripped off his heavy, fur-lined velvet royal cloak and stepped forward, gently draping it over her shoulders. He pulled the thick fabric tightly around her, his hands lingering for a fraction of a second on her arms. "Are you unharmed?" he asked quietly, his voice dropping to a tender, intimate register, meant only for her ears. Isolde looked up at him, clutching the edges of the warm cloak. For the first time in her life, the hazel eyes that stared back at him held no fear. They held the quiet, unshakable confidence of a queen. "I am perfectly fine, Your Highness," Isolde replied, her voice steady and clear. "But my work here is not yet finished." She turned, her bare feet stepping over the shattered glass, and looked toward the high table. It was time for judgment. The blizzard outside raged with renewed violence, howling against the exposed stone walls of the keep. But inside the great hall, the atmosphere was dead and still. Every werewolf remained frozen on the floor, their eyes fixed on the small, raven-haired girl, wrapped in the oversized royal cloak. Isolde walked slowly toward her father. The heavy iron slave collar, which had miraculously survived the transformation, still hung loosely around her neck, a stark, ugly reminder of the sins committed within these walls. Alistair Sinclair was still on his knees. As Isolde approached, he finally looked up at her. The arrogance that had defined his entire existence was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, pathetic desperation. "Isolde," Alistair rasped, his voice trembling. "My daughter, my beautiful, powerful daughter. The moon goddess has blessed our house. We did not know. If you had only shown us." Silence. The word was spoken softly, but it cracked through the room like a whip. Alistair's jaw snapped shut instantly, his wolf submitting entirely to her command. "Do not insult my intelligence, Alistair, and do not dare call me your daughter," Isolde said, her voice devoid of any familial warmth. "For 3 years, I scrubbed the blood from your floors. I ate the scraps the hounds refused. I endured the beatings of your favored child and the mockery of your court. You did not see a daughter, you saw a commodity." Isolde reached up, her delicate fingers wrapping around the thick, rough iron of the slave collar. She didn't struggle with the latch. Instead, a faint golden glow emanated from her fingertips. The heavy iron suddenly turned red-hot, then white-hot, before melting away like candle wax, dripping harmlessly onto the marble floor. "You stripped me of the Sinclair name," Isolde continued, stepping closer to him. "You banished me from the Silverpine Pack, and I gladly accept." Alistair's eyes widened in horror. "No, Isolde, please. With your power, Silverpine could rule the entire kingdom. We could." "You will rule nothing," Isolde interrupted, her voice turning cold and sharp. She raised her hand, her golden eyes flashing brightly. Suddenly, Alistair let out a blood-curdling scream. He clutched his chest, collapsing onto his side. The invisible, metaphysical tether that connected an alpha to his pack, the source of his authority and strength, snapped with a violent, audible crack. Isolde was forcefully severing his alpha bond. She was stripping him of his rank, his power, and his connection to the wolves he had abused. "By the right of the golden blood, I declare you unfit," Isolde decreed, her voice echoing with ancient authority. "Alistair Sinclair, you are stripped of your alpha status. You will live out the rest of your days as an Omega, exiled to the barren fringes of the Whispering Mountains. Let the winter winds teach you the humility you failed to learn in this castle." Alistair sobbed into the floor, suddenly looking incredibly old and fragile, his fearsome aura completely gone. Isolde then turned her gaze toward the stairs. Rosalie and Kaelin were huddled together, shaking uncontrollably. Rosalie's expensive crimson gown was torn and covered in dust. "Rosalie," Isolde said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You who found such joy in my pain." "Isolde, please," Rosalie whimpered, tears streaking her perfectly powdered face. "We are sisters. We share blood." We share nothing, Isolde replied coldly. You and your mate, Kaelin of the Ironclaws, are hereby banished from the Northern Territories. If you are ever found within 50 miles of the Silverpine borders, the local patrols will have my permission to hunt you for sport. Run. Kaelin didn't hesitate. The massive, arrogant heir scrambled to his feet, grabbing Rosalie by the arm, and the two of them bolted out the shattered doors into the blinding snowstorm, disappearing into the night as disgraced, clanless rogues. Finally, Isolde looked at Lord Fenwick, who was still pinned to the floor, groaning in agony from his broken ribs. As for you, Boglord, Isolde said, disgust lacing her tone, your swamp is forfeit, your lands now belong to the crown. The royal guard will escort you to the capital's deepest dungeons, where you will spend the rest of your miserable life answering for the Omegas who never returned from your estate. She looked past the shivering lords and ladies, raising her voice to address the rest of the Silverpine pack, the servants, the guards, the lower-ranking wolves who had watched her suffer in silence. Silverpine is without an alpha, Isolde announced. The royal crown will assign a temporary regent until a worthy leader emerges from your ranks. The days of cruelty and oppression under House Sinclair are over. Treat your Omegas with reverence, for you never know when the moon goddess will send a monster to test your humanity. The silence in the hall was absolute. No one dared speak. No one dared challenge her. The weak, mute, Omega had overthrown a dynasty in a single evening. Isolde let out a deep breath, the adrenaline finally beginning to leave her system. She felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over her. The monumental shift and the expenditure of such ancient magic were taking their toll. She swayed slightly on her feet. Instantly, strong, warm arms wrapped around her waist, catching her before she could fall. Cedric pulled her gently against his chest, supporting her weight. The scent of petrichor and amber enveloped her, grounding her racing heart. You have delivered your justice, my queen, Cedric murmured softly into her ear. It is time to rest. Isolde looked up at the crown prince. I have no home, Cedric. I banished myself. Cedric smiled, a genuine, breathtaking expression that made the corners of his midnight blue eyes crinkle. You are the golden wolf, Isolde. The entire kingdom is your home. But if you would do me the honor, my carriage is waiting to return to the royal capital. The High King and Queen have been searching for you for a very long time. He reached up, gently brushing a stray lock of raven hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a warm, comforting shiver down her spine. Come with me, Isolde, not as a ward, not as a subject, but as my equal. As my mate. The word hung in the air, a promised future that Isolde had never dared to dream of. She looked around the ruined great hall, at the broken remnants of her past, and then up at the man who had stood beside her when the world feared her. Yes, Isolde whispered, a real radiant smile finally breaking across her face. Take me home. Cedric swept her up into his arms, carrying her easily. He walked out of the shattered oak doors of the Silverpine Keep, stepping out into the roaring blizzard, but the cold did not touch them. Together, the Golden Queen and the Lichen Prince vanished into the winter night, leaving behind a legacy of fire and stepping toward a future forged in gold. And that is how the weakest Omega became the ultimate queen. Did the Golden Wolf's revenge give you chills? Or were you swooning over Prince Cedric's grand entrance? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below. If you loved this medieval werewolf romance drama, don't forget to like, share this story with your pack, and subscribe for more epic fantasy tales. Until the next full moon.
Hi, my name is Mountain Confessions, the owner and manager of Mountain Confessions. After watching the video, everyone mocked the weak Omega until her golden wolf made the entire court begged for mercy. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the emotional shift from humiliation to power. Watching someone constantly underestimated and looked down on can be frustrating, especially when everyone assumes weakness means worthlessness. That's what made the reveal of the Golden Wolf feel so satisfying emotionally. The story wasn't just about strength, it was about how dangerous it can be to judge people before truly understanding who they are. Do you think the court feared her power in the end, or were they more afraid of realizing how badly they had treated her? And why do you think stories about underestimated characters finally proving themselves resonate so deeply with people? I think stories like this remind us not to dismiss others too quickly, and to remember that quiet people often carry strength nobody sees at first. If this story stayed with you emotionally, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional Alpha King stories filled with revenge, hidden power, and unexpected transformation, feel free to like and subscribe only if you'd like to see more.